Thanks for engaging this message and watching it and having a heart to learn and grow in your relationship with God. But before the message gets started, I want to lay in front of you a couple convictions that are on my heart. Conviction number one is for those folks who go to Grace Fellowship. If you attend one of our campuses, I want to make sure that you understand that watching messages online or on your phone shouldn't be seen as a substitute for actually attending a service. It's so important that you get to a service, you participate in the singing and the giving and even the serving as you interact with other individuals at that campus. And so we want to make sure that you get to a campus as soon as you can. And then I also want to share a conviction for those of you that don't go to Grace. While we love that you're engaging the teachings here, we want to make sure that these teachings are just seen as supplementary to the teachings that you're getting from your primary pastor or your pastoral teaching staff at your church. So it's so important that you sit under their leadership and their authority and the teachings God has given them. With that in mind, I look forward to what God's going to do in this message. Hope that you enjoy it and that God stirs your heart as you grow in your relationship with Him.
All right, listen up. I got something to say. Yes, that's right, it's me, money. And I talk. And right now I want to talk about us. You and me. See, I've been riding around in your wallet for years. You've been pinching my pennies and stretching my bills, and I've been cool and quiet. Not anymore. Let's start with this. Who's in charge here? Who works for whom? You say you're the boss, right? And I'm just a tool, right? Well, let me ask you this. Why do you stay up late at night thinking about me? Why do you talk about me every time you're making your plans? Why do you worry about me and whether I'll be there for you in a week, a month, or a year? Isn't that weird? Because I think that's weird. Come to think about it, every time you talk to your spouse about me, you fight. Honestly, I'm flattered, but I'm just not that into you. Some days, you think I grow on trees. And some days, you hold on to me like I'm the last hope you've got. Listen, what's it say on every bill? In God we trust. But do you? No. You trust me. You look to me. You want me to take care of you. You want me to make you happy in life. Well, I would if I could, but as you may have heard, I can't buy happiness. So you better listen up to this message and listen good. Because there's a lot more to life than, well, me. Cha-ching.
Well, welcome to Grace. My name is Jeremy, and I am glad that you are here with us across all of our different campuses. Happy Thanksgiving. I'm glad you're able to be here with us this weekend. If I haven't had a chance to meet you yet, like I said, my name is Jeremy. I'm the campus pastor for our Jefferson campus, and I'm excited to be here today. And I bet there are plenty of people who are excited to be here today because something happened yesterday that I didn't realize was like a huge thing, but apparently it's a huge thing. It's like for what, the 10th billionth year in a row, Ohio State crushed Michigan. I didn't realize that this was a rivalry. People are throwing out the term rivalry. But for all you Michigan fans, help me understand. You're using a term like rivalry, but when was the last time you guys actually won? I mean, the rivalry seems like it's about as competitive as like an NFL versus a high school team with the win-loss ratio that's going on here. I don't understand that. All I know is I'm supposed to show up and say OH. Not sure exactly what that means, but I said it. So you guys know that, I wrote it for the good team and not the bad team, and I crossed out all the M's that I'm supposed to cross out around my house to show that I belong here in Ohio. So said that, I'm so glad Ohio State won. Means you guys are gonna be in a great mood for us to talk about money today. If you're just joining us, we have been in a 4-part conversation called Money Talks, where we've been engaging this topic of money. And in week number 1, we talked about this idea that money makes a terrible God. And oftentimes what we do is we ask money to do what only God can do. And when we do that, we can enter into a dysfunctional relationship with money. And so if we're not supposed to do that, what should we do with money? Well, that was week 2. And what we looked at week 2 is that money is really a tool, not a treasure. And when we use that tool and leverage that tool well, there's a number of things that just unlock in our life. We unlock the ability to enjoy the gifts that God has given us, to be generous to people around us, and to invest eternally in what God is doing in the world around us through the local church. And then in week 3, Keith brought a great message talking about greed, that greed is such a powerful force in our life, that one of the best ways that we can break the power of greed in our life is by taking a next step of generosity. And so this week, we're going to be wrapping up the conversation, and we're going to be talking about contentment and what it looks like in our life on a practical basis. For all of you parents or even aunts and uncles, or if you've worked with kids, one of the things that's really caught on in recent years is teaching little kids sign language. I don't know if you've ever seen that before, where before kids they can speak, one of the things that they can do is they can do sign language. And so you can teach them different words to help them communicate. And when we first had our daughter Elaine a number of years ago, we decided, hey, let's try this out. Let's see if we can teach our daughter sign language. And so one of the first things that's really easy for kids to learn is this sign right here. And if you've worked with little kids, you know exactly what this means here. This is the sign for more. And if you've ever had a little kid, this is an incredibly powerful sign for little kids, because it starts to teach them for the very first time that something that they want, that they don't have, they can get if they just do the right thing. And so it was great at first because you start teaching your little kid, and we start teaching our daughter more. And at first you're like, oh my gosh, my daughter's a genius. She can do sign language and she's not even 1 yet. And it's great. But then all of a sudden it's like she wants more cereal. She wants more snacks. She wants more candy. She wants more reading time. She wants more TV time. She wants more of anything. And all of a sudden you start to realize that you get into this endless treadmill of more. Constantly. It's one thing after another. And before, it was kind of nice because she would cry and I'd have no idea what she wanted, so I could just ignore it. Now I can't do that anymore because immediately I know what she wants. She wants more. And what's fascinating about this is it reveals something to us about human nature, because if we're really honest about ourselves, I think many of us would recognize that, well, little kids do this and they want more. And it can be really easy to think, man, they're just so immature. They're just endless pits of greed. The same thing is true for us. As we get older, we may not want more Cheerios. We may not want more cartoons on TV, but there's other things in our life that as we start to experiencing them, our first inclination in our heart and in our soul is towards more. You recognize, man, you got a great house, but then you start looking around at some of your friends' houses or some other houses, you're like, man, upgrading from a 2,000 square foot house to a 3,000 square foot house sounds pretty nice. I mean, I've got the iPhone 10 and it works great, but the iPhone 11, man, that seems pretty awesome. Man, I got like 120 points on my fantasy football team, but 200? Definitely better. I gotta be the top of the league. Or even maybe that moment when you have little kids and all of a sudden you recognize you gotta sleep in past 7 a.m. with kids in your house. You're thinking, man, I could use some more weekends like that on a regular basis. Or that moment where your wife goes to Target and she doesn't spend $1 billion. You're thinking, I could take some more days like this and more Target trips like that. Or even for all the dudes in the house, when you're married and you've had the date night, you're probably thinking a couple things that are like, you got something on your mind. You know what it is. You think we all naturally have something inside of us that we have something we want. We have something we like. We naturally want just a little bit more. Because there's this belief that we have about more, that more is always better. And if I want better, I always want more. And it's really easy for us to import that into our finances and into our relationship with money. In fact, I put your first fill in the blank this way. I encourage you to write it down, that we all believe this. It's true about all of us, that we believe we would be more content with just a little bit more money. I mean, throwing this up here, there's probably very few people that are actually like, I don't know if I agree with that. This is not a Christian thing. This is just a people thing. We tend to all believe that with just a little bit more money, I would be a little bit more content. And oftentimes with this, we tend to believe this to a point, but we also have this other belief that if that only is true until we hit like a certain level of income, that there's a certain point where I no longer want more. There's a certain point where I don't feel like it would be great to just get another little raise. It would be great to get just a little bit more income. It'd be great to just be able to have a little bit more spending money. We think, I don't know what it is. Every one of us has a different number in our head that we think, if I made that, right? And if you're making $40,000 a year, you're thinking, if it was just 45. Or if you're making 50, you're thinking, if it was just 55. Or if you're at 60, you're thinking, man, if I just made 70. Or if you're at 90, you're thinking, if I just made 120. If you're making $200,000, you think, if I just made 300,000. We always think just a little bit more. We think, but if I just got to that, I'll finally be content. If I just get a little bit more money, I'll finally be content. But while that's easy for us to believe, I think if we were to think honestly about our own heart and our soul, we'd recognize that that doesn't tend to be the case with people. In fact, what the evidence shows over and over and over again is that this thing in us that believes if I just had a little bit more, I would be content, we carry that with us everywhere we go with every dollar we make. In fact, a number of years ago, there was a British billionaire that was being interviewed in British media. And one of the things they asked him, he said, man, you just keep on making more and more and more money. How much money do you need before you're content? And he put it this way when he answered. He says, when will I have enough? Only a little bit more. Right? He's got more money than he could ever dream of spending. And his heart inclination is this, you know what? Know what would make me more content? Just a little bit more money. Now, it would be easy for you to say, well, we're talking about a billionaire. I'm sure he's like crazy greedy. I'm not like that. I'm not greedy. I'm just your average Joe. I don't need $1 billion to be happy. I'll just take maybe like a couple 100,000 or maybe even just a couple million. I'd give some of it away. Like, I just want to get to a place where I don't have to worry about money anymore. I want to get to a place where I can go on a vacation and not stress about the budget. I want to go to a place where I can upgrade my phone or upgrade my car or go out to that nice restaurant or get that nice piece of clothing without having to worry about whether or not this is going to negatively impact my budget later. I just want to get to a place where I feel that way. And a number of years ago, there was an actor and comedians group where they were gathering together with a lot of their friends who were incredibly successful, and they were all at that place. They had all come to a place financially to varying different degrees of this financial state where they didn't have to worry about money anymore. And as they were interacting, there was this theme that was coming up while they were doing this interview about the fact that even though the people were in that spot, they were still incredibly discontent with their finances and with their life. And Jim Carrey was there, and as he was interacting, he said something pretty profound about money and relationship and our desire for just a little bit more. He said this, I think everybody should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed of so that they can see that it is not the answer. He said, man, I've lived a life where I don't have to worry about finances. And you know what's interesting about life? I still take myself with me. You can upgrade your home, but you're the one that's still living in it. You can get that promotion, but you're still the one doing that job. You can get that new car, but you're still the one driving it. You can get that new relationship, but you're still the one in the relationship. And you can get that raise, and you're still the same person you were before that raise. What Jim Carrey is saying here is, man, the answer is not found in something external. He's starting to understand, he's not even a Christian, that the contentment issue is one that actually, its source is not external. It's not connected to our circumstances. It's not connected to our wallet. It's actually something we live out of rather than achieve. It has to do with our heart. And for many of us, we look at this and we think, sure, maybe I can agree with that, but I would much rather have Jim Carrey's financial problems than my financial problems, right? I would much rather deal with the financial stress of being a billionaire than I would with dealing with the financial stress of living on a medium income. You know why we think that? It's because we subconsciously believe that if I just had a little bit more money, I would finally be content. It's so subconscious in us that even when we're given the two options of being poor and discontent and rich and discontent, we assume that rich and discontent is going to be better. When in both instances, with Jim Carrey and what we're going to start to see today is that the discontent actually can never be solved by any one of those things, and no amount of money will ever get to a place where we don't deal with that discontent anymore. We have to look somewhere else beyond ourselves in our relationship. And the reason why we look at that and we think, oh, it won't be me, is because we have a belief that we all have. In fact, I put it in your notes this way, that we all think that we're going to be the exception to the rule. Well, everyone else may be discontent when they make more money, but not me. Like, they're all greedy, but I'm content. I will be the one that when I get that number, when I make 70,000, when I make 50,000, when I make 100,000, I'll be content then. Everyone else won't be, but I will be. But come on. Let's be honest. We tend to think that we're going to be the exception of the rule, but that is just simply not true. In fact, if you were to do a poll of people in the United States and probably even people here sitting in service today, what you'd find is that 90% of people say that they are more generous than the majority of the people around them. Now, I am not good at math, but I know that 90% and more than 50% don't seem to work together. That means that there's something fundamentally inside of us where we have the capacity to self-deceive ourselves in our ability to deal with our relationship with money, in our ability to accurately understand what's going on in our inner life, in our inner world, and how that intertwines and is married to our relationship with money. And like we saw in that video, we all kind of instinctively know as well that money can't buy you happiness. But because there's this belief in us that if I just had a little bit more money, I would be content. We tend to overlook this truth, and this is just a fact. I want to encourage you to write this down, that more money doesn't lead to a life with less problems. In fact, if you look at all these people who are incredibly rich, they would say, yes, this is true. You look at everyone who makes way more money than you, what they would tell you, what they would show you is that their life doesn't necessarily have less problems, they're just different problems. But there's this thing inside of us that thinks, man, if I would just had the richer problems though, I would be more content with my problems in my life than I am now. And that simply isn't true. In fact, one of the things that's fascinating is when you study and you look at people who weren't rich and then they became rich, or who were poor and then they found more money, what you'll start to recognize is that they have this tension where they recognize that adding money to the problems doesn't actually fix it. It oftentimes just makes it worse. In fact, when the founder of Ford became incredibly wealthy, he had the equivalent of in modern day dollars, $199 billion. I mean, just incredibly wealthy. And he said this about his life and his job. He says, I was happier when I was doing a mechanic's job. Do you see what he's saying there? He's got more money than he can ever spend in his entire life. He says, you know what? I was happier when I had things that I wanted and couldn't buy. I was happier when I had to live according to a budget. I was happier when I had to worry about whether or not I was going to have enough money to pay for my mortgage. I was happier knowing that there were people out there that had better stuff than me. I was happier. And again, we could say, but he's a billionaire. I'm sure he's just filled with greed. That doesn't apply to people like me. I would take less than that. Maybe just a few million or a few $100,000. I'm not that way. I'm just your average guy. But here's the thing, average people have this problem all the time. In fact, a couple of years ago, a man named William Post won a couple $1 million in the lottery. After winning his money and going through just a couple years of his life, and he ended up on his deathbed dying $1 million in debt. He said this about getting to a place where he didn't have to worry about money anymore. I wish it had never happened. It was totally a nightmare. Why is it so hard for us to believe this? Because deep inside of us, we tend to all believe that if I just had a little bit more money, I would finally be happy. I would finally be content. This belief is so deep in our heart and our soul. We've got to take some time today to create some space to think intentionally about this. Because even though we are confronted with an overwhelming avalanche of evidence that this belief that if I just had a little bit more money, I would be content is not true, we tend to discount that evidence and lean into this false belief that if I just had a little bit more money, I would finally be content. I would finally be happy. I would finally be at a place where I didn't want more. In fact, this is just so fundamental to what it means to be human, that 2,000 years ago, the Apostle Paul was writing to a young pastor named Timothy. And Timothy had a church filled with people who were in kind of the more upper middle class part of the Roman Empire. And they were in a church much like our church, and they were preaching, and he was a young leader, and he was encouraging Timothy. And this is how you help average everyday people deal with their relationship with money. And the fact that inside every single one of them is this belief that if I just had a little bit more, I would finally be happy. I would finally be content. In fact, in the beginning of the passage that we're going to look at, we're not going to go over all the details, but the Apostle Paul is talking about how there's these people that it's so deep in them that they actually get to a place where they rob themselves of truth, and they create for themselves in their heart and in their mind a counterfeit form of Christianity that comes to a place where they think that Christianity and religion as God is really about helping them just get financial gain, of helping them get to a place where they didn't have to worry about finances, of helping them just get a little bit more money so that they could be content. Apostle Paul's saying they've deceived themselves. They're sabotaging their ability to engage with and connect with God because they have a false belief about money that they've smuggled into their Christianity. And in doing so, they created a false, defective, and destructive form of Christianity. And what's fascinating about their context is that it matches so perfectly with what we experience on a day-to-day basis. That's one of the reasons why I love God's word. I love studying the Bible, because you'll start to realize that what the Bible talked about 2,000 years ago perfectly fits and addresses and empowers people like you and me in a context that's totally different to engage and get to know God and live a Jesus-centered life. And so what we're going to do is we're going to turn to 1 Timothy chapter 6. And if you don't have a Bible, I want to let you know that at all of our locations, we would love to give you a Bible. If you go to Grace Central, we would love to give you a Bible to say thank you for being here with us today. Thank you for participating in service with us. This Bible is a gift free from us, and we hope that you're able to get to know God and take a next step towards living a Jesus-centered life by engaging God through his word. So if you have your Bibles, feel free to turn over to 1 Timothy chapter 6. It's in the New Testament. And if you are like me and you're digital, you can feel free to turn on your Bible to 1 Timothy chapter 6. And we're going to dive into Paul's rebuttal or kind of correction to this false belief that if I just had a little bit more, I would be happy. So he starts talking in 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 6. He says, "But godliness with contentment is great gain." Now, here's one of the reasons why I love the Bible. It's incredibly rich. And what we don't realize in English is that when he says great gain here, what the Apostle Paul doing here is he's using a financial term. Another way of saying this is that, but godliness with contentment is a great profit or a great wealth or a great financial blessing. He's contrasting that to the people that believe that religion and Christianity and Jesus were just about helping them get just a little bit more. He says, godliness with contentment. And here's what's really important. By saying with contentment, what the Apostle Paul is saying here is that you can be someone with godly character. You try to honor God with your word and with your words and with your money and your relationships. You're trying to be kind and loving and service-oriented. You can have that without having contentment. And in order to get this great gain, the Apostle Paul is saying, is that you have to take Christian character that's grounded in the person of Christ, and you have to partner that with a practice of contentment. Which means that you can be a Christian with a thriving spiritual life to a certain degree that is starting to get suffocated because you have a defective view of money. That you could actually be robbing yourself, just like those other people robbed themselves of the truth. You could be robbing yourself of great blessing in Jesus because you haven't learned and developed the habit and the practice of contentment. In fact, another part of the New Testament, the Apostle Paul's writing, he says, I've discovered the secret of contentment. Implying this is not something that's intuitive to us. It's something that we have to learn. It's something that is counterproductive to how we often do our life, that we have to take a totally different direction and take on our relationship with money in order to get it. So the Apostle Paul is saying here, but when you get it, there's a promise, great gain. He says, for we brought nothing into the world and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. Here's what's amazing. What Paul is saying here is not we can be content, we will be content. Meaning that in many ways, the first step in contentment is a choice. Often in marriages, when I'm working with people that are fighting or they're just not having a type of marriage that's full of blessing and joy and connection and friendship and romance, it's because what they're often doing is they're waiting for the feelings of love to happen before they do the actions of love. And what they really need to start doing is if you put on the actions of love, our hearts are kind of slow and defective to a certain point that when we put the actions of love on, eventually our feelings catch up with it. And what the Apostle Paul is saying here is that first and foremost with contentment, you have to put the actions of contentment on before the feelings of contentment follow. And so if you're waiting to feel content before you live content, you're going to be waiting forever. Apostle Paul is saying here, all we need is food and clothing, just the bare necessities. Food and clothing, and we will be content. Not we could be content, we choose to be content. We determine to be content. I choose in my heart and in my soul to live out a content life, regardless of my circumstances. So what the Apostle Paul is saying here is he's mirroring exactly what Jim Carrey said, that the source of contentment and joy that every single one of us are looking for are not external, they're internal. So the first place we need to look is into our inner life, what's going on inside of our heart and our soul before we engage with the world around us and before we start to get our wallet under our control to the point where our contentment is not connected to what's in our bank account. So he continues in verse 7. He says, now, people who are arrogant or people who want to get rich, and here's where it gets kind of uncomfortable. Because how many of us, if we're honest, are thinking, yeah, I'd like to be rich. I'd like to get to a place where I didn't have to worry about finances. I would love to get to a place where I could go to Europe once a year. I'd love to go to a place where I could enjoy all the things that I want to enjoy and buy all the things I want to buy and have a huge Christmas for my kids. Like, I would love that. I would love never to worry again about paying a bill. I would love to get that. He's saying, hey, people who want to get rich, that's all of us. Now, he's not talking about billionaires, right? He's talking to people like you and me. That this thing inside of us that wants to get rich, that wants to get this level of financial freedom where we're in control, we don't need anybody or anything. Saying, you people, us people, all of us. He continues. He says, but the people who want to get rich, they fall into temptation and a trap and into many foolish and harmful, and here's what's fascinating, desires that plunge men into ruin and destruction. Do you see what he's saying here? A trap. Here's what we all know about traps. No one intends to fall into a trap. No one is like, for all you hunters that are out there, you're not like walking through doing your hunting for your deer and be like, ooh, a bear trap, right? You're not gonna do that. If you see a trap, you avoid it. The implication being that traps are things that we don't see coming. Jesus put it this way in the Gospels. He said, hey, be on guard against all types of greed. Watch out. Meaning that there's lots of different ways that greed has a way of worming its way into our heart and into our soul. He's saying because every single one of us want to get rich, every single one of us would love to get rich, we should all be careful because we can accidentally bring ourselves to a place where we are discontent. No one accidentally becomes content, but everyone accidentally can become discontent. And because of that, it seeps into our heart and our soul. He says because of that, our desires, they plunge us into ruin and destruction. And in the next verse, he kind of continues building on this theme, what this looks like in people's life. He says this, for the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Now, you may have never grown up going to church, and you've heard a phrase like this before. In fact, it's commonly said that money is the root of all evil. And it's actually a terrible translation of this passage. This is much more intentional, where the Apostle Paul is saying here, for the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. And here's what's incredibly important. Because one, he's talking about this idea of this desire. He's using a wordplay over and over again, that people who want to get rich, they desire to get rich, they desire money, they love money. He's using this word over and over again. And it's actually the original Greek word is where we get the scientific term or the medical term for bulimia. Bulimia is an eating disorder where a person, they want to enjoy food without actually bearing the consequences of eating that food. And they force themselves to a place where their inner desire for themselves doesn't actually match their external life in their body. And so it brings them to a place where they start to adopt and take on self-destructive behavior and habits. What the Apostle Paul is saying here is that we have a relationship with money like a bulimic has with food. That we want money so that we can consume, and we somehow think that it won't impact our life in such a way that's negative. We think that our relationship with money is neutral. And what Paul is saying here is, no, that's not the case. We start to divorce ourselves from our inner life and our inner desires from what our outer life looks like. And when we do that, destructive things start to happen. And he says all kinds of evil. The way that we can think about that is like cancer. Cancer is something that multiplies and morphs and changes, and over time it becomes incredibly destructive. And so when he talks about all kinds of evil, he's saying that there's this type of greed, there's this type of evil that over time, because of our inability to recognize that this thing inside of us that just wants a little bit more, it starts that way and it metastasizes. It changes. It morphs. It spreads. And eventually, it becomes deadly. He talks about that in the end of this verse. He says, some people, eager for money, it's that same word again, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. I don't know about you. That's scary. He's not saying the billionaires have to worry about this. He's not saying the millionaires have to worry about this. He's saying common day, everyday people like you and me. We got to be careful, because if we don't, we can get to a place where we wander from faith, we wander from connection, we wander from a Jesus-centered life, and we pierce ourselves with many griefs. In many ways, what the Apostle Paul is saying here is that the root of some of your deepest life hurts could be connected to a defective relationship with money. The Apostle Paul is saying here is what money would say here. In fact, if money were speaking to us, it would reiterate what Paul is saying, and I put it in your notes this way, that if money could speak, it would say that a little contentment is itself a big blessing. Contentment in and of itself is doing so many great, big, blessing things. And the reason why I use a little contentment is because oftentimes we grow in contentment with little next steps. Very few people become content overnight. We take a little next step in the square footage of our home. We take a little next step in how we deal with our income. We take a little next step in what we buy for ourselves. We take a little next step in when we realize, I don't need that upgrade. I don't need that new car. I don't need those new clothes. I don't need to eat at the best place. I don't need to take a vacation at that expensive location. We take just little steps. And every time we take a little step of contentment, it reaps a big blessing in our life. And I recognize that there are a lot of people that this may seem attractive, but you're thinking kind of skeptically, really? I don't know if I see that. I don't know if I see how taking a simple next step of contentment leads to a big blessing in my life. And so what I want to spend the rest of our morning doing together is I want to look at 3 things to help us see the blessing. Because I think if we could start to see the blessing with our eyes, it will grow the attraction of contentment in our life. And it will grow our commitment to contentment in our life. And it will eventually allow us to release ourselves to take hold of contentment in powerful, transformative ways. And so here's the first blessing that we need to see about contentment. That contentment guards you against self-inflicted grief. Contentment guards you against self-inflicted grief. You know, it said that because of the love of money, because of their eager to get rich, there's this thing in them that leads them to wander away from the faith and pierce themselves with many griefs. You know, as a pastor, one of the things I've seen over and over again is they start to grow spiritually because they're going through something challenging and trying in their times. And then they start to get their prayers answered and they get that promotion. And they start to actually be able to afford more bills or get that bigger house or get that nicer new car. And it starts to become this process where they move themselves further and further away from community, further and further away from attending church on a regular basis, further and further away from being a part of a men's or women's Bible study, being a part of a grace group, serving on a regular basis. They get to a place where they're so eager and excited to just take their next step financially or get that promotion or get that new job or pay for that new house. They slowly start to drift. And then it's terrible, but it's like I can almost see it coming from a mile away. And I start to recognize the grief is coming. And they one day end up across in a coffee shop or in between services or just over the phone or text talking about the grief that they're experiencing. How many of us can think of a marriage that was ruined because they got that promotion? How many of us can think of family that was alienated because they kept working and working and working and they could afford the boat and the vacation home and the great 401k, but they lost what mattered most, which is a relationship with their kids or their family members? How many of us know a friend where they got that dream job that they wanted and then you just never saw them again? Here's the thing about this. The reason why contentment guards us against a potential self-inflicted grief is because it forces us to look inward. Contentment in and of itself, remember, it's connected to character. And so when we start to examine our heart and in our life, what we're really doing at that point is we're starting to examine the source of our future griefs. How many of us know, if we're honest about ourselves, that some of the biggest griefs that we've experienced in our life are self-inflicted ones? Right? If you've ever tried to change the way you speak about someone or something or to someone, you recognize that there's this disposition in us to live out and speak out what's really going on the inside. Money's the same way. We live out of what's really going on the inside. If you've ever had that moment, maybe when you're in a fight or it's a joke or you say something, and as soon as it comes out of your mouth, you're like, just put it right back in your mouth. Because you're like, what happened in that moment? You lived out of what was really going on inside of you. Money is the exact same way. Money is not going to get to a place where it starts to corrupt you. It's going to reveal what's really going on inside of you. And even if you don't believe in Jesus, this is not a church thing. This is not a Christian thing. This is a people thing. In fact, Will Smith put it this way in talking about the power that money has. He says, money and success don't change people. They merely amplify what is already there. What contentment does is it allows us to focus our attention on the source of our real problems. Because our natural disposition is to look externally, but what we need to do is develop ourselves to examine internally what's going on inside of us. And so because we start to get to a place where a little bit of contentment then becomes a great blessing in and of itself, because it helps us focus on the real issues. And as we address the real issues, we start to reap a greater and bigger blessing in our life, which is a changed and transformed and liberated character. That's the first thing it does. It's the first blessing. And this in and of itself is fantastic. But that's not the only thing. Here's the next thing that money does to help us see, that contentment leads you to love what you have more than what you don't have. The Apostle Paul said, hey, as long as we have food and clothing, we will be content. See, here's the source of all discontentment. The source of discontentment is when you look outside of something that you don't have and you love that more than what you have right in front of you. If you've ever been in a relationship where you've become increasingly dissatisfied in that relationship, it's often because the spouse that you have is not the one that you want. The friend that you have is not the one that you want. And so because of that, you start loving the thing that you don't have more than the thing you do have, and so it starts to diminish your ability to actually enjoy what's right in front of you. We have this really weird tradition as Americans where we do this all the time. Every time we go out to food, I don't know if you've ever done this before, where you're hanging out with your friends and you may be eating a fantastic meal. And what do you guys start doing? Like, this is so great. So you start talking about other restaurants with other food that you really like. You can't actually be present enough to enjoy what's right in front of you. We start immediately thinking about, oh, that one place or that pizza. We start immediately going there next. It's just inside of us. We start to look outside. This happens in marriages all the time. And one of the things I encourage married couples to do is when you start to actually cherish and appreciate and fall in love more with the person that's in front of you, suddenly the thing outside just seems less attractive. And when you love what's in your life more than what's not in your life, you actually get more life. So contentment actually is not something that takes from you. It actually magnifies the goodness and enjoyment of everything that's around you. The dissatisfaction robs you of what you have in hope of what you don't have. In many ways, contentment is the exact opposite. You fall less in love with what you don't have, and you learn to appreciate and cherish and find joy in what's immediately right in front of you. And how many of us would say, man, if I could fall in love with what's right in front of my face, my life would be perfect. Contentment sets us up to have a richer life by far, because we can experience and enjoy and taste and see the goodness of what is immediately in front of us. That's the second blessing that it brings into our life. Here's the third blessing that it brings into our life. Contentment has the power to redefine your riches. Every single one of us, what we do when we become a follower of Jesus is we start to import into our expectations what Jesus is going to do in our life. We have these expectations of things that Jesus is going to do in us and for us that he has never promised he will ever do. I want you to look up here for a second. This is incredibly important. Many of us think that if I just do the right things, God will make sure that my life is filled with comfort and health and wealth and prosperity. And if I do the right thing and obey, my life will be easier. And that couldn't be further from the truth. You can do everything right and still be at a place where you are tight financially. You can be incredibly generous and honor God with every dollar you've ever made and still never be able to have that vacation or that upgrade or that home that you want. And what starts to happen is we start to think that if I could just get those riches, that is really the external source of joy and happiness. But when our character starts to change, because we're aware of our inner self and we're guarding ourselves against self-inflicted grief, and then we start to fall in love with what's immediately right in front of us, what happens then is that our expectations about life start to change. And if you've ever met someone who's dissatisfied with life, what you'll find is that their expectations are just totally off base. Their expectations about their spouse or their job or their stage of life or their kids or whatever get out of whack. And when they get out of whack, they become miserable. Right? You've seen the parent, they put unrealistic expectations on their kid. And what does it do? It destroys the relationship. You got the spouse that puts unrealistic expectations on their spouse, that they will be the source of their joy and their hope and their happiness and their affection and their goodness. And that spouse shrivels under that pressure. Or it could be a passion. You have a passion and a hobby and you dive completely into it. And that passion can't hold the weight of all the satisfaction and joy you need. And so you destroy it. We have all these things that are riches that we think if I could just get those. And God often leads us to a place where we don't get those. And if you're thinking, man, that just sounds miserable, why would I ever want to give my life to Jesus? It's because he has the ability and the power to redefine your riches. And what once were your riches become rusted trophies. And the things that once seemed like crosses to bear become your delights in your life. Thousands of years ago, when the Roman Empire was collapsing and falling apart, there was a pastor. His name was Ambrose of Milan. And he was once a rich business person who gave that away to just serve God and serve God's people. And as the Roman Empire was falling apart, the economy was collapsing. People were losing their homes. Their economic future was falling apart. People who once were rich were losing it. And people who were working to become rich and have that life they were looking for realized that they would never get it as everything was falling apart around them. And he gathered together Christians who were just deeply wrestling with this. And they read this passage that we just read in 1 Timothy and in spending time helping them understand the power of God to transform people's riches to something totally different and redefine them. He said this incredibly profound statement. He says, even poverty itself is riches to godly men, as well as godly women. Godly men make their poverty turn to riches. They get more riches out of their poverty than ever they got out of their revenues. Do you see what he's saying here? He's saying there is a power inside of contentment that when it is unlocked, we fall more in love with the gift giver than we do with the gift. And the natural disposition of our heart, we went over this in week 1, is that we ask our money to do what only God can do. And in doing so, what we do is we start to lift up the gifts over the gift giver. And anytime we do that, we invite destruction and self-harm into our relationship. And what Ambrose is saying here is that when you get to a place where you fix that, this is what starts to happen. You can be in a place where you never get what you want, and it's a place of riches. You can get to a place where you never get the home that you want, or the promotion that you want, or the vacation that you want, or the iPhone that you want, or the car that you want, and it's not a loss. You can have all the joy and all the riches and all the hope in that state because your heart is more connected to the gift giver than it is the gift, and it redefines and transforms all of what's happening in your life. And if you're someone that says, man, this is what I want to go there. How do I get that? How do I get that type of contentment? Remember, it comes in small steps. You can come to a place where a little contentment brings a big blessing in life. I want to invite you this week, especially as we're heading into holiday season. We just got done with Black Friday and people are shopping and getting, and we're thinking about getting and getting and spending and spending and getting and getting and spending and spending. It's this never-ending cycle of consumerism and money. To pray this prayer every day for the next few weeks. It comes from a passage in the book of Proverbs. It says, 2 things I ask of you, O Lord. Do not refuse me before I die. 1, keep falsehood and lies from me. Give me neither poverty nor riches, but give me only my daily bread. He continues in the next verse. Otherwise, I may have too much and disown you and say, who is the Lord? Or I may become poor and steal and so dishonor the name of my God. This prayer is a prayer of contentment. It redefines our riches. It allows us to fall in love with what's immediately right in front of us rather than what we don't have. And it guards us against self-inflicted grief. This is the prayer of a content heart. And this is what, if we were a community of people, we prayed this every day and this became our heart, you would take leaps and bounds in your contentment, and you would experience leaps and bounds in the blessing of following and knowing Jesus and living a Jesus-centered life. You know, one of the hard parts of living a content life is that we look around our life and there's just so many great things. God has chosen to bless our country and our nation this time of history with so many great things. And it's easy to become dissatisfied with what we have as we look around and we're just consumed with want. We're consumed with what we don't have. And we look at all these other things, we think, man, those are going to be the source of my joy and my hope. And this is the final thought I want to leave you with today. The most content person in this life is the most discontent person with this life. Your contentment is directly linked to your ability to become disenchanted with stuff and money. The more you start to recognize that no amount of cash No amount of things, no amount of stuff will ever produce anything meaningful in your life. You become disenchanted. You recognize that I can't be content in those things. An iPhone will never make me happy. A new car will never make me happy. A new home will never give me satisfaction. That promotion will not bring me the affection and affirmation that I crave in my soul. The more I become discontent with those things, the more I get connected with my Savior, the more I find my identity in who he made me to be. And as I do that, something magical starts to happen. It starts to unlock something inside of me where I can actually start to enjoy life more, because I freed myself of finding my contentment and my joy and my goodness in stuff. And instead, I've knitted my soul together with the creator of the universe and the author of every good and perfect blessing. And if you're someone who you're on the outside of Christianity looking in and this just seems too good to be true, it is. Unless you've given yourself and you've given your life to something other than yourself. You've come to a place where you're saying that my identity, my worth is no longer based in my stuff and what I do. It's connected to my creator and what he's done for me. It requires you to get to a place metaphorically on your knees where you say, I desperately need to be connected with my creator. And in doing so, you start to recognize that you become disenchanted and disconnected and discontent with the world around you. And your contentment is then linked to the only eternal source of joy and hope and peace and patience and goodness. And when that happens, your contentment and joy will surpass any economic downturn, any disappointment, any lost job, any unemployment, any small Christmas, any unmet gift. And it will fortify you against life. And in many ways, that is the truest form of financial freedom that any of us could ever ask for. Thank you for being here today. I hope as we've been engaging with this topic of contentment, you can start to see that a Jesus-centered life is the best life, and that a little contentment brings about and is in and of itself a big blessing. Would you pray with me? Heavenly Father God, I recognize in my own heart, my own life, that the disposition is towards stuff. It's towards a bigger bank account. It's towards more things. It's towards my wallet. God, I pray that as every other person here, that we would take a next step towards contentment, that we would allow our heart and our mind to be connected to you and who you are and what you've done for us, that you would free us from this just rat race of stuff and things and possessions and money and a bigger bank account and promotions, and allow us to find peace in our connection to you. A peace that surpasses all understanding and all economic situations and all unmet desires. God, what I pray for myself and what I pray for every person is that we would fall in love with you. And as we fall in love with you, God, would you give me the character that cultivates contentment, and give me the power and practice to put contentment into place so I can experience the good life that you promised me in following your Son. We ask this in your good name. Amen.